One of the things that I covered were spacesuits, the vacuum of
Right.
space,
Hmm.
and then of course the whole Venus and Mercury argument, which I think is pretty cool. But maybe we can start with spacesuits in space.
Sure.
The point of the whole thing with the astronaut suits is that technically they should explode when they are, entered into a vacuum environment. Now, what NASA claims is that the spacesuits are designed to expand a little bit, when they're out in the vacuum of space. But the fact is that they're made out of I want to say, less than a quarter inch thick.
Yeah. 3/16 inch.
Yeah, 3/16 inch thick material that's 11 different layers of fabrics. Now, I'm sorry, but let me put it to you in this perspective. Do you think that you could make a vacuum chamber out of 3/16 inch material fabrics? And the answer to that is, of course, no.
Yeah. No
That
way.
you have to have structural and tensile strength in order to allow for a spacesuit that's going to enter the vacuum of space. And really, the only way that this could possibly work is if you have a pressure neutral spacesuit enter the vacuum of space. So what that means is that the interior pressure of the spacesuit would have to be a near perfect vacuum. Then they could go out into the vacuum of space and it would still expand, but then that doesn't work. I mean, your body has to be under 15 pounds of pressure per square inch in order for us to survive, because that's what we're used to. So this idea that NASA was sending up sewn together. And the old ones were one piece, but they were still sewn together. The new ones have interchanging parts, but essentially sewn together or slapped together fabrics, entering a near perfect vacuum without exploding, just completely debunks, it totally demolishes the idea that they've been to this so-called vacuum of space. Now, another big point here is that on the moon, the moon is a very, very good vacuum according to Earth terms, because it has no atmosphere, no barometric pressure, and so even hopping out onto the moon, assuming that their spacesuits could work, technically the materials should have melted because they were on the day side of the Earth, which is 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So their little booties should have melted if they didn't explode.
Big
Um,
time.
Right, but it's just when you start to study more and more of the so-called, moon landing footage and watch, it just looks more and more like a set. Like you can literally tell where the foreground is, and then there's almost like a sharp line where they have a background painting, right? So it just becomes more and more absurd. And they continue faking this stuff. The spacewalks are obviously done in underwater tanks. I just recently watched a video. I was going to do a response, but I just made a comment. It was Secure Team 10 had this video that they caught a UFO from the ISS, and it was obviously it was obviously an air bubble. And so I told them in the comments, no, that's not a UFO. It's an air bubble because they're underwater. But you got to try. You got to
Yeah.
try.
Yeah. One of the other things also that they had Jamie from Mythbusters, demonstrating, having his hand inside of that suit, and he's going, you can't do anything with these things being pressurized because when you think about how much pressure we're actually down under here, you're right. In order to go out into that near perfect vacuum of space, we would have to be at an atmospheric pressure, or the astronauts would have to be at an atmospheric pressure somewhat close to what that space would be, so that when they went outside, it would kind of inflate their spacesuit and give it some pressure. But the problem with that is that when you get biological material or even water in that much of a vacuum, first of all, water will boil all by itself when it's in that much of a vacuum. And of course, that's been proven, by the NASA documentation. I think you may have even put it in here. But
Yeah.
beyond that, the guy that was in there, the astronaut that was subject to that, he said, well, the last thing I felt just before I passed out was the water on my tongue starting to bubble, right?
Yep.
So this is another reason that NASA doesn't use this gigantic, outrageously expensive vacuum chamber for training, because it's as simple as this. No human being can survive in a vacuum like that. It is simply impossible. And the idea that a 3/16 inch quote unquote pressurized suit is going to save you from that is beyond belief, because it would make that suit so unbelievably rigid. It would be like the most taut balloon ever, and you wouldn't even be able to, forget about moving your fingers. You wouldn't be able to move your arms or your body, your torso, anything, because it would be so unbelievably rigid from the incredible pressure, that pressure differential between the inside of the suit and the outside near perfect vacuum. Not to mention the fact that the guy's blood would be boiling, right? So and here it is right here. Here they're going to put water inside of a vacuum chamber, and we're not even evacuating it that much. He's not getting anywhere near the level of a vacuum of space, right? And so what happens? Here it goes. It's going to start bubbling, just like the astronaut said before he passed out, that the water on his tongue was starting to bubble. So
Yeah,
it is
and
impossible.
that astronaut was in a vacuum that was 3 orders of magnitude lower than the vacuum of space is supposed to be in the heliocentric model. Now, we're not talking about 3 levels lower. We're talking about 3 orders of magnitude. So if you're familiar with, the term, he was barely even in a vacuum compared to what would happen in space. And so the whole idea of spacewalks and moonwalks is just ridiculous. And yeah, you're right. In order for the astronaut to survive, his suit would have to have a constant 15 pounds of pressure per square inch all over his body. Now, when you put him out into the vacuum, yeah, that thing would explode. His blood and saliva and all his liquids would boil, and then he would explode. I mean, that's what would happen. I mean, it's just amazing to me that physicists and pretty much the entire world believed that or didn't think about this when atmospheric pressure has been known for so long. But I guess it's one of those things where if you tell a big enough lie long enough, and you've got enough money to spread it around the curriculum and across the media, that anything people see on TV, any lie people see on TV is the truth, right? I mean, that's what we've got. That's where we've come to.
Totally, 100%. Yeah, it's funny because I saw somebody did a quote unquote flat Earth debunking video. I think it was this morning I was watching it, and the guy on there was saying that, well, no, the reality is the bigger the lie, the more unlikely it will be to succeed, which of course is completely backwards. It's really, the bigger the lie, the more likely people are to believe it, right? Because it's so unbelievably audacious. And they've known about
Right.
this for a long time in the Hegelian dialect, the problem, reaction, solution. So yeah, it's just funny to watch all this backpedaling, but this is great. Here we have the Mythbusters, which of course one of the agents of the Illuminati trying to, bust stuff. And you can tell that, even look at that glove. You can tell it's not pressurized. And even with it not pressurized, he was unable to hardly turn those bolts. But you pressurize that to the point where his blood doesn't boil in his fingers, and he won't even be able to move those fingers, not with 15 psi. Of pressure at any point along that spacesuit, and I would defy them to show us an example where that would be possible. I just don't think it is.
Yeah, you can see them bending their legs and stuff, and bending their fingers when that's supposed to be a highly, and there you can see his thumb,
His
right?
thumb, yeah.
Yeah, but they're supposed to be under this high pressure suit with a vacuum environment outside, and yet they're able to bend at the joints, and again, back then these were all sort of seamed together fabrics. I mean, it's just preposterous. It really is preposterous that people believe that they were doing this in a vacuum. You can see your hand now, we can see your thumb.
We can see
Yeah.
I loved that. I tried to find that video that you did, Jared, and clip that in, but I couldn't find it.
Yep.
That's hard to see. Sometimes I can't remember either. I couldn't tell you what video that's in.
I know, I know. I tried to find it for a while, and I was like, ugh, I can't find it.
It's
Yeah,
out
and of
there
course
somewhere.
the Glober rebuttal to that would be, well, no, that just looks like it. It's not really obviously not his thumb, because if it was, he'd die, right? But the thing that capped it was the announcer, that the guy he was talking to in Houston, saying, we can see your thumb. It's like, okay, explain that, genius.
Right, because that's really the only way that you're going to be able to do these tasks. Because I think that this is probably done underwater, and the only way that you're going to be able to do the tasks that they claim that they're doing is if you've got the use of your digits. I'm sorry, if you've ever tried to use even like, let's just say a mitten and try to do, tedious work with your hands, it's hard. Now imagine if that mitten was like, highly pressurized so that you could barely move your fingers. Yeah, I mean that's it just
Yeah.
makes me
And look at
sick.
this. It's so obvious that that's not pressurized. It's all wrinkled everywhere. There's not one iota of pressure in there. And he still can't turn those nuts, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
Well, and it's
Anyway,
it's a backwards experiment anyway because what they've done is they've essentially evacuated the chamber, and he's sticking his arm into the chamber, but it's nowhere near the amount of vacuum that would be in space or even on the moon, and there's obviously not all that pressure inside of the suit or the glove that he's in. So yeah, it's a half-assed experiment anyway. But even in that half-assed sort of extra light conditions, it's still difficult for him, right? So I mean, what does that go to show you?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, and that's of course why we see, when we see the NASA videos, we see them just moving their clips around. They're little tether clips, and they're never
Oh,
doing
pause
anything
it,
ever.
pause it there, because you can kind of see there's a line, like sort of, I don't know, about where the astronaut on the left's face mask is, where you can see that there's a foreground and then like a background painting, like a background set. And they never show you in any of these the fourth wall. They never do a 360 panorama unless there's specific shots that where they were tried to make it convincing. But in most of these spacewalk shots, you can clearly see like the old Stanley Kubrick technique of I guess it's sort of like a backlit back painting or whatever for the background, and then you've got your
Right.
foreground. It looks like a set to me with the lighting and everything. I mean, you can clearly see that they've got very nearby lighting, and of course they're not boiling in the sun and exploding.
Yep.
And I think it's great that you brought up the fact that they many times are doing some sort of extraneous activity. And when you said that, I was actually driving when I heard you say that, but I came home and looked at some old videos and just watched, and you're absolutely right. There's no change in the inflection of their voice that would come with the kind of activity that they're doing. When you're putting a lot of effort into something or you're falling down, it sounds like it's all recorded after the fact.
Yeah, yeah, like bunny hopping along the surface of the moon,
Right.
in a situation where you could probably die any second, just even if a small little hole, pops into your suit, and the guy just like, hey, this is great. I can hop around like this all day. He's not, he's obviously not performing some sort of cardiovascular activity.
Right.
Right.
You're trying to
Even if he,
record yourself jumping up and down and see if you can keep your voice at one modulation. There's no way.
try
Right.
and do it in a swimming pool, you can't even do it in a swimming pool when you're, the mass of your body is greatly relieved.
Mhm.
It's just not possible to not have any voice change, and that was a good point, But people, when you want to believe in it, and again, they'll say the same thing about us. They will subconsciously look past stuff like that and never question it, because the mind and the cognitive dissonance simply won't acknowledge stuff like that. And then, of course, if it's brought out directly, then the excuses start being made up, which is very interesting. But there's a big difference between an excuse for something and an explanation of the action that makes sense. And I think a lot of the things that flat earthers do is, especially, my goal especially, is to try and explain things and not just have this, nebulous explanation, but an explanation that has some sort of basis in demonstrable science that we can actually go back and point to and say, see, like, for example, if we were to do this test and jump around in a swimming pool and try to talk without making it sound like we're doing any anything strenuous at all. That would be something that you could point to, at least as some sort of viable evidence, to prove your point. But a lot of the times,
even if you did that, they're going to come back with some excuse for why that didn't happen, and that's the way it always is, and that's the way it will be. And I thank God for things like evolution and the moon landings to at least show me science isn't what they say they are. It's hilarious to me that people who talk about evidence and proof and all these things believe in the moon landings and believe in evolution and call it the most scientifically perfect theory there ever was. It's such a joke, because anything that you ever came up with to discredit it would just be explained away with just some nonsense reasonings.
Yeah. There's an answer for everything, and there again you can sort of see the backdrop set. They have an answer for everything, and it's like no matter what you show them. I guess my point is, if we can prove that NASA faked one single thing, then we really need to go back and revisit everything that they've purported and see if it seems to be true. And the more and more we do this, it really, really appears that they're faking everything, not just one or two things. They're faking it all. And it really begs the question, if they're faking all of this, then why? And globe earthers don't have an answer for that, you got to wonder.
You got to wonder if NASA just wishes that all the Apollo moon landings and stuff would just kind of go away, because they are the easiest thing on Earth to debunk. It's so ridiculous, especially with the professional forensic analysis that have been done. All the things that we know now, that stupid, ridiculous cardboard and tinfoil paper, LEM, all these things. NASA, they just got to be hating it. And not to mention the fact that now, they sit there and tell us, as soon as we can figure out, how to shield these astronauts, from these Van Allen radiation belts, we'll be able to go out and, go out into deep space and do things like this. And so, again, why is it a problem now when we did it, 5 or 6 times back in the 60s?
Take a look at the ISS guys when they go out for a spacewalk now. You have the 2 guys in the suits that need to be catered to by 2 other people as if they're their personal servants to put on every piece of the suit, connecting every piece, and then when they come back from space, they have to have somebody take it off for them. So how did Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin take care of all those things by themselves? There was only the 2 of them. They're in the LEM. You've got to put on your own spacesuit. You've got one person that, you've got the other person there to help you, but who puts on that final piece? Who connects the final glove? It's just preposterous that all that stuff is so difficult now, but back then they just did it with ease, and nobody has any of that on film, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was all lost and then found and then re-recorded over because they wanted to save money on reel-to-reels.
The greatest event ever in the history of humans, and we're going to just use this, record over it.